This is a case of Yoshihiro Hattori and how he was looking for a Halloween party when he knocked on the wrong door. Yoshi was born on November 22nd, 1975 in Nagoya, Japan. His family describes him as a gregarious teen who was friendly, loving, and full of life. Yoshi had always been fascinated with America and he had always wanted to come to the United States to meet new people and learn the language. So he decided to apply for a foreign exchange program, and to his surprise, he was accepted. He was finally going to be able to accomplish his dream and move to the United States. In the summer of 1992, 16-year-old Yoshi packed his bags and headed to his new home in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Yoshi was going to be staying with a host family that consisted of Dr. Holly Haymaker, her husband Richard, and their 16-year-old son Webb. Holly says that as soon as she picked up Yoshi from the airport, he had made a huge impression on her. He wasn't shy or quiet around the family, and he quickly made friends with Webb. Like I said, Yoshi was a very friendly person, so as soon as he entered high school, he was making friends left and right. September of 1992, Yoshi and Webb attended a blues festival with Holly, and of course, at the blues festival, Yoshi was being very social, and he ended up meeting another student that was also from Japan and was also a foreign exchange student. This girl ended up inviting Yoshi and Webb to a Halloween party that her host family was going to be having for other foreign exchange students. Yoshi was so excited about this. This was his first ever American Halloween party, and he couldn't wait to just dress up and experience this. Yoshi had recently been watching a lot of John Travolta movies, so he decided to dress up as Tony from the movie Saturday Night Fever. As for Webb, he had actually been injured in an accident a few months ago, so he was currently wearing a neck brace. He decided to use that as part of his costume. So he was going to dress up as an accident victim, so he was wearing the neck brace and then put a couple of bandages on, and that was it. No one was wearing fake blood, no one was wearing a scary mask, nothing. So on Saturday, October 17th, 1992, Yoshi and Webb headed over to the party. The girl's address was 10131 East Brookside, and Webb wasn't really too familiar with this area, so he was a little bit lost. When Webb finally arrived to the correct street, he ended up finding a house that was covered in Halloween decorations and had a couple of cars parked in the driveway, so he figured that this is where the party was. But it wasn't. He was supposed to go to house 101, but he ended up stopping at house 103, just 5 doors down. When they got there, it was around 8:15 p.m., and again, this is just a couple of days away from Halloween. Webb and Yoshi walked up to the front door, they rang the doorbell, they waited a few seconds, but when no one came out to greet them, they walked away. They just figured that they simply had the wrong house. Meanwhile, inside the house, a woman named Bonnie Pierce is looking at the boys through her side door window. She quickly opens the side door, looks at Webb, and then looks over at Yoshi and gets immediately scared. She quickly slammed the door shut, she locked it, and then ran over to her husband Rodney and told him, "Get your gun." Then, without hesitation, Rodney grabbed his weapon and headed to the door. Webb immediately notices the weapon and realizes that this is a dangerous situation, so he starts yelling at Yoshi to step back. But at that point, Yoshi was walking towards Rodney and telling him, "We're here for the party, we're here for the party." Rodney yells at Yoshi and tells him, "Freeze." It's believed that Yoshi didn't understand the slang word for freeze, so he continued walking towards Rodney, and that's when Rodney pulled out his weapon and shot him in the chest. Okay, go to part 2. This is part 2 on the case of Yoshihiro Hattori and how he was looking for a Halloween party when he knocked on the wrong door. Rodney fired a shot at Yoshi, and then he slammed his door shut and walked back inside. Meanwhile, Yoshi fell to the ground and was still conscious but crying because of his pain. Webb ran over to a neighbor's house and asked him to come help and to also call 911. At this point, the neighbor didn't know that his neighbor Rodney was the one that had just shot this young, unarmed boy. So he started yelling at the house, asking them to come out and to also help. And the only thing that Bonnie said was, "Go away." 40 minutes later, an ambulance arrives, and unfortunately, en route to the hospital, Yoshi passed away due to blood loss. When Yoshi's family heard the news, they immediately booked a flight and headed over to Louisiana. Holly was nervous to meet the Hattori family in person because she felt like this was her fault. She was supposed to keep their son safe, and he had died under her watch. However, when they finally met in person, the first words out of Yoshi's mother's mouth were, "How is Webb?" Of course, they weren't mad with the Haymakers. I mean, this wasn't their fault. They knew that the only person responsible for this was Rodney Pierce. After the incident, police brought Rodney down to the police station. They questioned him, but then they released him. They felt like he didn't do anything wrong. He was just trying to stop an intruder from trespassing into his home. However, the Hattori and the Haymaker family were not going to let him go, so they worked with the Louisiana governor to finally charge him with manslaughter. Before the trial began, Rodney's attorney Lewis actually asked them if they could set aside their grief over the dead boy and give Pierce a fair trial. A couple of Rodney's neighbors even started a defense fund and were trying to collect money for him to help him out. They were even angry that he was being charged with manslaughter in the first place. They felt like he was in his right to defend his home and that Yoshi and Webb were intruders. Bonnie testified at the trial and said that when she first saw Webb, she was kind of confused because it looked like he had been in an accident. It wasn't until she saw Yoshi walking towards her that she feared for her life. Bonnie said that he looked really scary, and she even said, "I guess he appeared Oriental. He could have been Mexican or whatever." She assumed that these two boys were going to hurt her, so that's why she ran in and told her husband to get the weapon. She says that there was no thinking involved. None of them sat down to think about why they were doing this, what the consequences of these actions were going to be, nothing. Now, when Rodney testified, he said that he had never seen his wife so scared, so that's why he didn't hesitate and ask her, why do I need to get my weapon? What did you see? Also said that Yoshi was moving in a very weird and strange way, so that's why he was scared and that's why he decided to fire his weapon. The trial lasted 7 days, and in the end, the jury found Rodney Pierce not guilty and acquitted him of all charges. The Hattori family filed a civil lawsuit against Rodney, and the judge concluded that self-defense was not necessary and that there was no reasonable justification for killing Yoshi. The Hattori family was awarded $100,000, and they used that money to start a memorial fund for Yoshi. I did make a donation to the fund, and my thoughts and prayers go out to the Hattori family.
Imagine falling in love with your dad, your biological dad. Then imagine getting pregnant by your dad. Now imagine your dad murdering you and your son, then turning around and taking his own life. Well, that's exactly what happened in this incest triple murder suicide case of Stephen Paddle and Katie Rose. Okay, so boom. It all started when Stephen was 20 years old and met his 15-year-old girlfriend Alyssa in a chat room on the internet. They fell in love, and Stephen drove all the way from New York to Texas to get Alyssa, and they ran away together. And of course, soon after, she got pregnant. Alyssa then gave birth to their daughter, Denise. And this is where things took a turn, and Alyssa started seeing a change in Stephen. He started getting angry a lot, throwing tantrums, throwing objects around the house, just breaking things. And he had a weird obsession with weapons. This wasn't the guy Alyssa knew from the chat rooms. But things got more disturbing when Stephen started abusing the baby. When the baby would cry, he would take her and shake her and even pinched her so hard he was leaving bruises on her. He then took it a step further, and when she would cry, he would take the baby and put her body inside of a cooler and shut it. Then he would leave the baby in there where obviously she can suffocate, and right when she's about to lose air, he would take her out the cooler. This guy was sick. Alyssa, after seeing how angry and abusive Stephen was to their baby, she decided to give Denise up for adoption, and of course Stephen agreed, and she was still under 1 year old. This is where Denise is adopted and becomes Katie Rose. She went to school, she loved art, and she had a loving family. Years goes on by, and Katie is now 18 years old preparing for college. Meanwhile, Stephen and Alyssa, her biological parents, had 2 more daughters. She decided to have more kids with Stephen because she thought they were older and more mature and ready for a family this time. So now that Katie is 18 years old, she wants to know where she comes from and meet her biological parents, and her adoptive parents was okay with it. She finds Stephen and Alyssa and starts getting to know them. Then she packed her bags to actually go visit them and meet her little sisters. When Katie got there, this is where things got weird and inappropriate. Stephen started wearing skinny jeans and tight shirts, talking and acting different and growing his hair out, and slept with Katie in her room on the floor, like for part 2. Falling in love with your dad, then getting pregnant by your dad, then your dad murdering you and your baby, then taking his own life right after, part 2. Okay, so boom, like I said, Stephen started acting weird when his daughter Katie came around. He started wearing skinny jeans and tight shirts. He started talking and acting different, and he even grew his hair longer. It was weird for his wife Alyssa to see, but she thought he was just trying to be cool for his daughter Katie. Katie enjoyed her time with her biological parents so much that she decided to move in and not go to college. And now that she was staying there, things got even weirder and inappropriate. Stephen started sleeping with her in her room, but just on the floor. And of course, his wife Alyssa found that weird, and they got into a huge argument. Alyssa eventually moved out, took her 2 daughters, and filed for divorce. But Stephen stayed home with Katie. Not too long after his ex-wife Alyssa moved out, she read her 12-year-old daughter's diary. Her diary said things like, "My dad calls her baby. My dad said she's my stepmom. He doesn't want me to call her sister, but Katie is my sister. Does she see me as her daughter or sister? After reading her daughter's diary, Alyssa in shock calls Steven and asks what's going on. He replies, I thought you knew that we were in love. Alyssa called the cops to report this ancestral behavior, but the cops just talked to Steven and Katie and they did nothing. Couple months later, Steven and Katie moves to North Carolina and they get married and she's pregnant AF. And his mom and her adoptive parents were there for support. And eventually, Katie gives birth to their son. Couple months later, everything caught up to them and they were arrested for adultery and incest. The bond was $1 million, but somebody bonded him out. But there was a protective order between them, so Katie went back to go live with her adoptive parents and Steven went back home. And Steven's mom now had full custody of their son. As they awaited trial, something came over Katie and she did not want to be with Steven anymore. When Steven called to talk to her, she told him she wanted a divorce. And Steven becomes angry and dangerous. Exactly 1 week after the call with Katie, he then goes to his mom's house and takes his son, then goes home with his son, then covers his baby's face and suffocates him. Back for part 3. Falling in love with your dad, then having a baby with your dad, then getting murdered by your dad, and he also murders your baby. Then he turns around and takes his own life, part 3. Okay, so boom, like I said, he takes the baby home, covers his mouth and suffocates him. And after he's done suffocating his own son, he places the body in the closet and shuts it. He then drives from North Carolina to New York all night nonstop. He goes to his daughter's adoptive parents' home, parked near the front, and stalks her. The next morning, Katie and her adoptive dad goes into the car and starts driving. Steven follows and catches them at the stop sign. Then he just starts shooting nonstop until both of them are murdered. Then he went to a hotel's parking lot and he took his own life. Triple murder-suicide, including his daughter/wife, his baby boy that he had with his daughter/wife, his daughter's adoptive dad, and then himself. Steven was 40 and Katie was just 18. And unfortunately, that's the case of Steven Paddle.